the stay lifted in the civil case that's separate from this, meaning there will be a new fight over whether the president has to give a deposition. Avenatti tweeting to Giuliani, quote, "Buckle up, Buttercup," as if this fight is just beginning, Jason.
Ed, thank you very much. Let's bring on our legal panel to break down today's developments. Harmeet Dillon is a Republican and a lawyer. Vinoo Varghese is a criminal defense attorney. And Tom Dupree, who was a deputy assistant attorney general in the George W. Bush administration. I thank you all for being here. We want to try to break down today's developments, and I want to just do it one at a time. So let's talk just first, we'll go around the horn, on Paul Manafort. And Harmeet, I'd like to give you the first stab at this. What's your take on the developments today?
Well, the developments today are, I think, very unfortunate for Mr. Manafort because he is close to the president at one point in time for a brief period of time. He got caught in the crosshairs of the prosecution and the Mueller investigation. As we can see from both the indictment as well as the charges and the ultimate jury verdict today, we don't see anything about the president, about Russian collusion, or anything other than irregularities in his taxes and statements to banks. Now, those are serious issues, and unfortunately, Mr. Manafort now will probably spend a good decade plus to the rest of his life in prison, depending on what happens next. But it's got zero to do with the president, and it just frankly underscores that but for his closeness to the president, he probably wouldn't have been prosecuted. So it's part of the narrative of unfair witch hunt here.
Now, Vinoo, who's joining me here in the studio in New York, is she right? Harmeet makes a good point. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump and but the proximity of the president's really what's driving this, isn't it?
Well, look, I think the first thing that you should note is that ostriches and pythons all across the country will sleep well tonight knowing that Paul Manafort will remain behind bars. Understand that this is a big victory for Team Mueller in the court of public opinion because they won this case in the court. There have been a number of guilty pleas here.
But it's a case that has nothing to do with the original Manafort directive.
This is Trump's campaign chairman, was his campaign chairman.
Are you going to, like everybody that's ever worked for you, are you going to live up?
Paul Manafort here has been found guilty. Look, his team took a gamble.
Something that he did a long time ago.
His team took a gamble and tried this case in Alexandria, Virginia, hoping for a much more conservative jury than in Washington, D.C.
Do you really believe that he would have been prosecuted except for his proximity to Donald Trump?
Obviously, they looked at him. That was part of it. No, I agree. His proximity to Donald Trump brought this case. And that doesn't mean this is the only thing.
And look, if somebody has skirted the tax laws, I want them to be convicted. But to have the national spotlight on him just because he's worked for like 100 days for Donald Trump seems a bit over the top. But let me get Tom's take on this. Tom, what do you think is happening here with Paul Manafort?
Well, a few things here, Jason. For one thing, I do think he was the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, look, the fact that Bob Mueller is poking around, Mueller has a broad mandate. He has the authority to investigate any crimes he uncovers in the course of investigating Russia collusion. Unfortunately for Manafort, put the spotlight on him. I think as far as the president goes, I think there is no legal jeopardy to the president from today's verdict. As we all know, this involves things that are not connected to Manafort's work on the campaign or to Manafort's service to Donald Trump. I think at most the president is guilty of making a very poor personnel decision when he chose Manafort to be his campaign chairman.
But the reason that the president picked Manafort, I mean, that can be debated, but the question about whether there's a reason why the special counsel, right, decided to push this off for a different prosecutor rather than holding it for himself. Correct, Tom?
Well, the Manafort, remember, was tried by the special counsel's team, so I think this part of the case, Mueller is kind of keeping close to heart. Now, look, I agree with you that if Manafort
But why are they doing that? I guess the point I should make, worded better, was why do that? Is he now putting the squeeze on Mr. Manafort, saying, hey, look, I made my case. You're going to be convicted here. You've been convicted, and now I'm going to put the squeeze on you. You better cough something up on Donald Trump, or I'm going to actually... Is that where this is going?
Jason, I bet you that Mueller and Mueller's team have been putting the squeeze on Manafort for many, many months now, and he hasn't caved. I suppose the pressure will continue, although at this point, obviously, Manafort has lost a lot of the leverage that he had at the outset, given that he now stands criminally convicted. That said, it's possible that at some point they'll reach a deal. As we know, Manafort has another trial coming up in a few months, so there might be an opportunity to do some wheeling and dealing, although I tend to think if Manafort had something of value to give to Mueller and he was willing to turn it over to Mueller, you'd think Mueller would have it by now.
All right, let's talk about Michael Cohen, because that is a different scenario. And Vinoo, I want to give you the first shot at that. How do you read that situation?
Well, the first thing, I actually think this is a big political victory for the Republicans today, with announcing that Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's personal attorney, paid hush money to a porn star and a Playboy model. There's no debate that President Trump has better taste in women than Bill Clinton. He's an attorney. This is a guy who's committed a crime, multiple crimes, tax evasion, violations of campaign finance laws. He's going to be automatically disbarred. The question is, how much time is he going to face behind bars? The deal says 43 to 63 months, but that judge can give much more than that. That's a reality of the case. So for him, it leaves open the possibility of cooperating. There's still an opportunity to cooperate. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that December date is pushed back.
Harmeet, how do you read this situation? And I think it's pretty interesting who Michael Cohen picked as his attorney, because Lanny Davis is obviously no friend of Donald Trump, but very close in proximity to Hillary Clinton.
Well, a couple of things to keep in mind about Michael Cohen. I mean, you know, he's a guy who tapes his clients, and he's a guy who a few months ago, when he was looking at potentially 60 years in prison for these potential charges, at that point he was saying the president had nothing to do with any of this stuff, and, you know, there's no campaign finance issue. Fast forward to today when, you know, you're facing 60 years in prison, and the alternative is potentially 5 years in prison, and you can get that 5-year deal if you say that a couple of things that aren't crimes are crimes and pin them on the president. So I think that the overwhelming power of the prosecutors here in these situations, in every situation where it's a federal prosecution, has led to this result. And Lanny Davis has really sold his client out, because I think it is a real stretch, and I'm a lawyer who does election law, campaign finance. It is a real stretch to say that somebody who deals with paying off hush money to a blackmailer is necessarily trying to affect the outcome of an election. I suspect that throughout his career, Donald Trump has been approached by women like this who have, you know, shaken him down, and this is a standard way that people are paid off. And so, you know, I don't see the campaign finance violation here at all. And so, you know, it's really unfortunate that he was forced into this situation and has done this. But, you know, again, A, nothing to do with collusion or Russia, and B, no crime here for the president.
Jonathan Turley, a noted attorney, was on Fox News earlier. Let's listen to him, and then, Tom, I'd like to get your reaction to that.
I mean, unless this unidentified candidate is Bernie Sanders, it's going to be bad news. I mean, or you're not paying attention. Because if the prosecutors accept what is in this indictment, then the president just became an unindicted co-conspirator. That's the simple matter of it.
Tom, you've got deep experience with the Department of Justice. Is Jonathan Turley right?
Well, not quite. The way I look at it is, look, for one thing, the fact that Cohen pleaded to a particular charge doesn't mean that other people are automatically deemed guilty. I mean, that's why we have trials. That's why we have evidence. That's why we have juries make these determinations. I will also say that one of the most complex and Byzantine areas in the entire sphere of federal law is the election code. And lawyers will argue to the nth day about whether something constitutes an election violation or it doesn't. And I think this is no different. For me, what this ultimately is going to come down to is whether Cohen has something other than his own word that this is what happened, that these payments were made for the purpose of influencing a campaign, that they were done at the direction of presumably Donald Trump. If Cohen has Trump on tape, if Cohen has evidence to support his allegations, then it could pose greater jeopardy for the president. But right now, all we know is it's just Cohen's word against presumably the president's word.
But there are tapes. And is the Trump team able to hear and listen to all those tapes if they are in the possession of the special prosecutor? Or is that something that they've only maybe heard snippets of?
My guess is the president has not heard everything that's in the possession of the prosecutors. I mean, Lord knows what sorts of things Cohen was taping. There have been some tapes that address some of the subject matter of today's indictment. We don't know if those are all of them, and the tapes that we have heard have been somewhat ambiguous, to say the least.
But, Vinoo, I have a hard time believing that this is the end all. First of all, I haven't heard the word Russia yet, and collusion. You haven't seen anything there regarding Russia and collusion, have you?
That's not what this is. That's not what this is about.
I know,
today.
but this is where the special prosecutor is spending all of his time, about a guy who was, dealing with medallions on taxis.
Well, that's the tax evasion part of it, right?
Right.
So you have here Donald Trump's personal lawyer, the man who said he would take a bullet for Donald Trump, who's now said in open court that at the direction of the candidate, he funneled this money to influence the election. right? So the question of Russia collusion, that's a separate question. The fact is,
well, it was
that,
the prime question of what the prosecutor is supposed to be going after.
But he has a broad mandate, as he says, he can investigate different things, and all of this came from this. And the fact is, now you have Trump's national security advisor, his former campaign
Which they
chairman,
delayed, right? They delayed the sentencing to it, and there's a lot of evidence out there that he was manipulated along the way.
Guilty.
So, Harmeet, last word. How do you read the situation going forward? What happens next?
Well, I mean, obviously the left in this divided country is going to go, crazy like Vinoo just did, imputing guilt by association here. But, this is a tragic tale of a lawyer gone awry in many ways. It's unfortunate for him personally, but the president is very focused on his agenda. He's popular. I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't affect his popularity one bit, because people are beginning to see the results in this country. And yet, after all this money, all this effort, all this drama, all these indictments, all you've got is zero to do with the Russian collusion. The only person who committed campaign finance violations with respect to Russia, with respect to foreign countries, is Hillary Clinton, and she never got indicted. So I think this really underscores for the president's position that this is a witch hunt and it has no legitimacy and needs to end.
Mueller investigation is not over.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Harmeet, gentlemen, thank you. We do appreciate it. Authorities say the murder suspect in the Molly Tip